Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Senturus webinar on Agile Analytics for Cloud Cost Management. Happy to have everybody here today. Quick overview of today's agenda. We'll start with some quick introductions, talk a bit about growth of the cloud economy and challenges with optimization. We'll lead into the necessity of some tooling to make it easier to optimize your cloud spend. We'll talk about building your own and also do a demo of Envisor Cloud Analytics. And again, we'll wrap up with some Q&A. So in terms of introductions for today, we're happy to have Keith Knowles here. Keith is an accomplished sales and marketing leader. He has a proven track record in product development, and he is our Envisor Managing Director. Keith has held various positions with companies of all sizes, ranging from Accenture to Day9, Prism HR, and HP. And during his time at Amdocs and HP, Keith drove and managed strategic alliances that were valued at over $100 million. And I'm Steve Reed-Pittman, as usual, here to kind of be the bookends for today's webinar, but Keith will really be running the show and will be our main presenter. So Keith, welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Steve.
Nice to hear your voice out there, Keith. So before I turn it over to Keith, we're going to do a quick poll. So let me open this up. The poll here is, do you have an individual or a team that's responsible for cloud optimization in your organization? So let me open that up. And the answers are, do you have just an individual who handles cloud optimization? Do you have a smallish team, a largish team, or no one at all, or you may not be sure. So we'll just leave this open for a little bit and give everyone some time to answer. I'm sorry, I just realized I did not launch it. I had it on my screen. So there are the poll options. Go ahead and punch in your answers there for whether you have an individual or a team that's responsible for cloud optimization. And we do find that with a lot of organizations, managing cloud spend is kind of new territory. So you may or may not have somebody who's dedicated to that or a group for whom that's part of their role. So the answers are coming in. Looks pretty evenly split so far. We've got about a quarter of you have just one person, a quarter have a smallish team, quarter largest team, and a quarter of you don't know. So it's really spread pretty evenly right now. I'm going to go ahead and shut that down and share the results so everybody can see. So again, it shifted a little bit here towards the end, but it's pretty close to evenly split across the number of people who are dealing with cloud optimization in your organizations. So I'm going to go ahead and shut that down. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Keith for the core of our presentation. So Keith, take it away.
Thanks, Steve. And that's really interesting. I mean, the growth of the first slide here is really all about the rise of the cloud economy and the growth there, and it's just taken off, as I think everybody's aware. And if you've been listening to any of the earnings announcements, cloud spending is expected to decrease a little bit when you hear the forecast from Microsoft and AWS, but meanwhile, they're kind of calling things down a little bit, and there's a bunch of new entrants that are coming in as alternatives to AWS and Google and Microsoft as far as where you want to host your cloud. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next few years. But the one thing for sure, the fact that this poll is showing just about everybody has some sort of person or team that's responsible for managing cloud spend. It's a big part of most organizations, and we've seen that and the interest in that. And you're going to see a few more slides here as we get further down through this presentation that really talk about the number of tools and different types of options for managing cloud spend. But bottom line, it's a big deal for most organizations. We've seen cloud spend go from in just a really short time, and a lot of this was accelerated due to the pandemic, but we've seen cloud spend move to a point where it's going to be about $500 billion this year, and next year probably I would bet we'll still see it come close to that $600 billion next year. It's just staggering, and the growth rate in the cloud has been about 25%. And this is really these numbers are focused around hosting organizations, right? So the AWS, the Microsoft Azures, Google Cloud, platform, and others that are providing such services. Just really staggering, a 25% compound annual growth rate, which we haven't seen at that scale in a very long time. So from that point, it's really interesting. Most companies are seeing cloud spend increase and move towards it. As part of this, we've also kind of seen a shift in the way business has been done, right? So as we've moved the cloud, the way we procure and deploy resources has dramatically changed, right? So we went from, if you step way back in time, servers used to be acquired as a big planning process. A lot of work went into what I would consider more or less a swag, trying to figure out exactly what size machine we need for the next year. A lot of assumptions went into that. We call it a science, but in the end, it was a wild guess, so to speak, right? Then we bought the servers, we deployed them, they went in a data warehouse or data center someplace. Things have changed dramatically, right? We've gone from that to now where, as we've heard from some folks, that they can procure and set up. It's not really procure; it's just set up, spin up a new server in less time and effort than it takes for them to try to get a replacement keyboard for their computer. I mean, it's seconds to deploy something like this, and procurement is out of the loop in most cases, and finance is out of the loop as well. So it's really easy for engineers to spin things up really fast and create a very large cloud spend. So an engineer can spin up a server that costs $10,000 a year. They can't get a new keyboard to do their work on in less than 3 weeks, some places I've heard. Anyway, it's pretty interesting. So the cloud, the way things are done now, right, it's decentralized. Every engineer in an organization can spin up servers. The spend is variable, whereas before you used to buy that server, you put it away in your closet, you put it in your data center or co-location, and it was a known cost at that point in time. Well, now you've got people spinning things up, turning things off, turning them on. It's very quick and it's variable cost. So it causes people in finance and procurement it really strikes fear into them, so to speak, right? So, and the other aspect about this, I mean, it's fantastic that it's scalable, right? So you can really turn things up very quickly. But conversely, if you're in a scenario where, you know what, I'm launching a new application, I want to make sure that my end users are satisfied. I want to make sure that they have very fast response times. I very quickly just go ahead and launch a large server. And I really feel disconnected for the most part from the actual costs of that. So it's very easy for cloud costs to get out of control, right? Because if I'm an engineer or in DevOps or something like that, I'm launching a new server, I don't want complaints. So I'm gonna go ahead and launch a server that I'm comfortably sizing, that has enough headspace that there's not gonna be customer complaints. Again, in most organizations, people are very disconnected from that cost. And as a result, a lot of organizations will just overshoot their spend, right? So they'll have a budget in place. It could be $100 million, and next thing you know, it's coming in significantly over that. And we've heard from prospects and clients and folks, and we were at a trade show earlier this year, and somebody came up and said, since we've moved the cloud, we've just kind of gotten used to a six-figure surprise every once in a while. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is how do we help better manage that? We're not necessarily going to address the surprise clouds, although we do have products that do that, but the core issue here is that people need to have some governance in place to manage these things. Otherwise, they're going to end up with surprises. They're going to end up just overshooting the cloud spend and not by trivial amounts. So you do see a lot of stories in the press about people really overshooting cloud spend, and it's quite dramatic in a lot of cases. So moving forward, I mentioned that we attended a trade show earlier this year called FinOps. Senturus and Envisor, we are big supporters and believers in the FinOps Foundation. We do sponsor them, and we leverage their framework. Their framework is about how to manage cloud spend, or I should say actually optimize business value from your cloud, because it's really about getting the most value out of your cloud, not necessarily just cutting costs, but it's about delivering good performance for the users, as well as maximizing the value, so you're lowering costs in that process. FinOps does provide a framework, as I mentioned. They have a couple things that I think are pretty interesting here. I'm going to start on the right side of this for a moment, but pretty standard kind of QA process improvement types circle of life, so to speak, where you move from an inform, optimize, operate, where you're trying to understand, starting with the inform is where you're trying to understand your costs. You're trying to allocate those costs back out to business so people are aware of what they're actually spending. So an engineer will feel more connected to the spend as opposed to just clicking away and launching a server and not really understanding what the implications of that might be to the company. The optimize, really figuring out and how do we both make sure that our servers are right sized. We also find a lot of people will spin things up that they're no longer using. So you'll find things like unattached storage. You'll find servers that are idle most of the time or idle all the time that could either be turned off completely or turned down at certain hours of the day. And then also rates. So we're going to talk quite a bit about rate optimization here in a moment as we get through here. And then the operate phase. But this is considered a continuous loop, right? So you're constantly going through these phases. And you may have different parts of your business in different parts of the phases at different time, but you're always going to be going forward and looking at this and reviewing things, whether it's on a monthly basis, a weekly basis, depending on the size of your cloud spend and what the relevancy is. But if you're a large cloud spend, you're probably doing it on a continuous basis or near continuous basis. If your cloud spend is relatively small, maybe quarterly or monthly is adequate, but it depends on your organization, your environment. Stepping back a little bit to the domains, and again, this is where we're gonna drill into a couple key areas, and specifically in the areas around understanding your cloud costs and your usage. We're going to talk a fair amount about the rate optimization and cloud usage optimization today. So, these things all play into this inform, optimize, and operate part of it. We also do support the other functional areas: performance tracking, benchmarking, real-time decision-making. We have anomaly detection with our cloud-controlled product. Organizational alignment, our dashboarding plays right into helping the larger organization understand where their spend is and how well they're optimized per se. But our focus today will be really into this understanding your cloud cost usage, rate optimization, and optimizing usage. So moving along. Okay, so this is also leveraged from the FinOps organization, where they did a survey this past year to try to understand what the top challenges of companies are that are embracing cloud optimization and really trying to understand that. And some of the key things here, the number one key thing here ends up being this, and getting engineers to take action. It's not because engineers don't want to take action, it's because they're often not provided with the information. So as we talk about this concept of being able to bring the information back out, help make the engineers feel more connected to the cost and be aware of what their spend is. What we find and what we hear is a lot of times the engineers aren't even aware, right? They're just completely disconnected from what that spend may be when they spin up a new system. So bringing just awareness, bringing the tools, bringing the visibility, and then also general concept of trying to bridge the gap between more of a finance type role and the engineering role, and coming up with some common language. So one of the things that we'll talk about as we get into this is the ability to make right sizing recommendations. And a key thing about that is if you have a centralized team, which many of you clearly do, about 75% of you clearly have a team that's focused on this. It's often what we see is often a finance type person that has a strong technical bend to them. Could be they're trying to make recommendations. They need the data that gives them enough detail to be able to go back to an engineer and say, hey, here's a right sizing opportunity for you. And also, the more accurate that recommendation is, the better the response is typically from that engineer. So we try to work to bring good data together that works for both teams, right? That helps everybody kind of work together as a team, I should say. So we'll get into that. So one of the things is, again, getting the right information to the right people is a big part of what we're trying to do here. So why do you even need some tooling, right? So when you look at this data and you get into this, so why do you even need tooling to try to understand what you've got going on? And for those of you that have seen an invoice come in, this happens to be an example from a AWS invoice. If you've seen the invoices that come from Amazon, you get a line item in this case, and this is just a header off of it, right? So here's a line item. I have my EC2 spend $42,000 for the last month. I can actually on the bill, so I'm kind of being a little overly dramatic. I can from the bill see a list of the servers, the resources that I actually had spun up, or the number of them that I had spun up, but I will not get any utilization data from that. So, I'll get the next level of detail, but it's going to be very high level, and I can't tell who's using any of it from this perspective, right? So all I get is a number. It typically goes to somebody in finance or procurement. And they're going to look at this and just say, wow, that's a big number. And is it good? Maybe. Is it bad? Maybe. It's just, you don't know from this level of detail. So the next level of detail is really getting into what AWS calls their CUR, cost and usage report. Amazon has, or I'm sorry, Azure has something similar. Google, GCP has something. Everybody has something similar, right? So this is a sample CUR record, right? This is one record. These records, you're going to get 1 per hour per resource, and this is going to have the billing detail in it. It's going to tell you a lot of the utilization stuff. These files very quickly become, as the FinOps Foundation would say, they're not human readable, right? I mean, you look at this, it's this big CSV file. If you look at its one record, it's 744 records per month. Trying to put that into an Excel file becomes very challenging very quickly, right? So if you have 500 cloud resources, and just speaking for our company, which is, we've got about 150 cloud resources, they add up quickly, right? So 500 cloud resources equal, it's over 250,000 records. If you've got 2,000 cloud resources, you're going to have 1,500 records, or 1.5 million records you're going to have. Last I checked, Excel tops out at about 1 million records that it can bring in. And then you still got to parse it. You got to figure it out. And granted, you can make macros and try to make that quicker, but it's not an easy thing to decipher without some tooling. Folks that try to do this in Excel quickly get frustrated, and so they turn to, they start looking for tooling. And as a result, there's quite a few companies out there that have got into this, and we're actually going to, with that said, we're going to jump into another poll here. So poll number 2, and I'm going to let Steve run the poll here for me.
Yep, I will go ahead and kick that off. Thanks, Keith. So Keith is going to head into some discussion of some of the options that cloud providers offer for lowering your cloud spend. So our next poll is about whether you currently use reservations, CUDs, and/or savings plans, depending on your cloud or clouds of choice. Do you use any of those to help lower your cloud spend on resources that are used on a regular basis? And so go ahead and type or click your answers into the poll window there. And looks like there are a couple more coming in here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close it out and share the results with everybody. So it shifted a little bit in this last little bit of the poll, but it does look like about half of you are, if I'm doing correct math here in my head, about half of you are using some sort of savings option from the cloud providers. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hide these results and hand it back to you, Keith.
Okay.
From here.
Thank you, Steve. And that's interesting, right? So there's some familiarity with folks on the call with these programs that if you're, so the next slide here probably is more directed to those of you that aren't using some sort of reservation or savings program. They're pretty powerful, right? So we're not going to go into a how-to or tutorial on reservations, but I do want to just broach the topic of why reservations are important, especially if you're not using them today. You may not be aware of the power there, right? So if you take, and this is a single AWS, this is the actual pricing I pulled last week or 2 weeks ago. It's a T4G extra large server from Amazon. If you look at the monthly cost for that's $116 per month if I'm doing on demand. So if I'm doing an on-demand spend, I'm going to pay about $120 a month for this thing. My total cost for the year is going to be $1,400. for an on-demand instance. And this is again assuming it's something. Let's say I've got something that I'm going to run steady state and have it running all the time. I'm not doing any scaling on this. So one server is that $120 per month. If I make a 1-year commitment, and this is kind of best case scenario from a reservation perspective. But if I make a 1-year upfront commitment and payment, I cut that cost down to $68.67. I've got a 41% savings on that just by telling Amazon that I want to use that server for a year. And this is a prepay. If I do don't do a prepay on this, and I go month to month, but do commit to that 1-year agreement, it's still going to be about a 37% savings. So you still save a lot of money just by making that commitment. And if I up the ante a little bit more and go to a 3-year, I have a 62% savings. So it cuts my monthly costs on that to $43.89. And again, same thing, this is a 1-year prepay. If I were to do just a monthly pay by the 3-year commit, I'm probably looking at about a 58% saving off that list price. So reservations are really an important part of saving money with the cloud, right? So I actually should say we're reservations and savings programs, because there's the standard reservations were the first thing. AWS has recently, about 2 years ago, introduced savings programs, or savings plans, I should say. A little bit more flexibility in some ways, a little less in other ways. Azure is about to do the same thing. So having a team that can manage and apply, leverage reservations, really important. It's always a big part of this is getting finance to understand what you're doing when you're making these commitments, because a lot of people say, you know what, we went to the cloud because it's elastic. I can turn it on, turn it off, scale and save money because I turn things off when I'm not using it. Well, the reality is there's a lot of servers that you cannot necessarily scale down in real time. Or you can't even turn them off. You're not going to turn off your SAP instance, as an example, at nighttime when nobody's using it. You're going to leave it running. So reservations, savings plans, all of these things are very important. We do support those, and we'll be talking a little bit more about those in a moment. But I'm going to shift a little bit. With all this, you would think that there'd be plenty of options from a tooling perspective, right? So I need tooling. Hopefully, everybody kind of feels that. Based on what we've shared so far, that this is an important topic that you do need to make some investment into to manage your cloud spend. And there's a ton of potential solutions out there. And you would think that there'd be a Goldilocks, but the reality is a lot of companies don't necessarily find success with just one tool. And this, again, another FinOps poll or some research from FinOps, right? So a lot of respondents to this FinOps surveys, the average was 3.7 tools are in use to do the job. And probably the most interesting thing that I find from this is the number one set of tools that people are using. They're not third-party tools. They are the core tools that are provided by the software or by the cloud platforms themselves. So AWS Cost Explorer, Azure's cost management tool, and Google Cloud's version of those cost tools. Interesting thing is, when you look at the next set of what people are doing, is they're building their own. So they're building their own Power BI dashboards, they're building their own Google Cloud Platform dashboards, or they're building a homegrown tool, potentially in conjunction with those. So it's really interesting. So if you ask yourself, so why is this? Why aren't more people using these or relying upon just an off-the-shelf solution? Because this is a tough problem, right? So why aren't they leveraging an off-the-shelf solution? And what we find is that it's because they're inflexible, right? So these tools have rigid report structures. Folks want to be able to, they want to see the data in their own reporting structure, right? So if you have a larger company that has multiple divisions, they want to split that up by division. They want to see it with their own chart of account embedded. They want to use their own structure. They want to see the data in a format that's consistent with the other reports within the environment. So the flexibility is really important for them. Being able to, and also being able to use a tool of their choice to create reports, right? So I've got a next slide. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But being able to use Power BI as an example and be able to very quickly create reports, not just download to a spreadsheet and do this every month, but create a report in Power BI that I can then share. I can use over and over again. I no longer have to do that, extra step of exporting out of one of these other tools that I just showed the logo slide on, and reshaping it or refactoring that data. I can do that all in Power BI if I build my own tool and use a data warehouse type of thing. The data is extensible, right? So a lot of folks want to incorporate their own enterprise data, and we have a lot of people out there that are doing things slightly different than the norm, right? So being able to innovate and go beyond what these out-of-the-box solutions offer. So having that flexibility is really pretty important to people for all of the reasons above. And if hearing it from me is not enough, here's some quotes from some folks that we've talked to, right? So you see, these are some big companies, right, that are basically out there looking for something that's more powerful, looking for something that brings in their own data, looking for something that allows them to define their own metrics, right? So these things are all stuff that our clients and prospects are out there looking to do. So this is not me talking about it. These are, again, actual quotes from folks that have been like, how do I bring in external data and then understand something such as the cost to serve one of my customers, right? So you see a theme here with the last two quotes about bringing in my own data to be able to understand what's it cost to serve somebody that comes to my website, as an example. What's the cost to provide an order, process an order on my website, might be another thing that I'm trying to do. What's the cost if I'm a SaaS company? What's my cost to serve an incremental customer? Are all things that are really important for folks to be able to do and answer. And that's really kind of the holy grail of where cloud cost optimization goes. It's about understanding the business value and impact, and then ultimately, if I can understand the cost to serve my organization, fine grain, right? I want to be able to understand the cost to serve potentially a client, or the marginal cost of adding one additional user on my website. All of these things, if I understand that, I can then very easily, when it comes time at the end of the year, if I'm a public company, I need to do a forecast. If I'm private and need to do a forecast, I can very easily use my sales forecast. I'm expecting to add 10%, 20%, hopefully 25%, new customers. I can multiply that out by these various internal costs, and then I can figure out what my cloud spend for next year is going to be very quickly and accurately. That's a very high level example, but you can drill down very deep into this if you're getting to those unit economics and metrics, being able to understand the cost to serve your various customers, both internal and external, right? So we also hear people wanting to, and measuring the cost of their engineering teams and benchmarking internally and understand that. So having your own data, being able to see it the way you want is really powerful. Now, just furthering on this again, so this is a couple people, but who's actually doing this in practice, right? So who's actually going out there and building their own solutions? A lot of the who's who of the world, right? So a couple of innovators here, Netflix, highly customized business, but reality, when you look at the rest of these folks, they're all pretty much companies that you'd expect an off-the-shelf solution would support, right? But all of these have built their own, or are in process of building their own. So it's a big deal. It's really important. So to have that flexibility, to be able to bring in additional enterprise data and use that in your calculations. So that's where having your own data warehouse makes a lot of sense and really brings life to the numbers for folks when they can then see it. When you can go back to that engineer who's responsible for provisioning that server potentially, but not necessarily costs, and be able to share with them that, hey, listen, here's the cost to serve a client, and we'd like to figure out how to cut that down. So it's really important to be able to bring in those additional data points from within your company to be able to make the data meaningful and bring it to life to people beyond that core FinOps team that you may have. Okay. So challenges, right? So as we get to this point in time, you want to build your own, there's challenges to this, right? So these are the common things when you're building out a solution is really, how do I fund this internally when I've got folks that I'm competing for, and my manager says, you know what, why don't you just buy an off-the-shelf solution? Well, it's always a challenge there, right? So lacking the resources, time to build it. there's need to keep up with the clouds as they're constantly changing. Ingesting and normalizing data is something we haven't really talked much about, right? So one of the things that we bring value to, and also you'd want to do in your own data warehouse, is if you're multi-cloud, you're going to want to be able to bring all that data into your system and normalize it, so that if I'm looking at data from AWS and looking at data from Azure and Google and whomever else I may have in my platform, I want to be able to have everything normalized. So if I look at a reservation from one, and granted they all will have slightly different nuances to it, but I want to understand how that works. I want to be able to see that all in one area. I want to be able to understand, am I optimized across all of my clouds, and being able to potentially even benchmark across those providers to understand, is one performing better than the other, and maybe I need to shift from cloud provider A to cloud provider B or C, et cetera, right? Then there's always time to market. So trying to get something spun up quickly is always important, right? So hey, I need to spend the next 6 to 9 months to build a data warehouse to do cloud provider to be able to do my cloud optimization may not be a positive selling point internally. Of course, we can help with that, right? So that's always something we like to talk about, right? And share is we do have Envisor Cloud Analytics, right? It is our product here. It's an out-of-box data warehouse for cloud optimization. We do multi-cloud data sources. Something a little bit unique about our solution compared to virtually everybody else in the market is we are pulling in data in 5-minute intervals. So we do have very fine-grained data. We also bring in cost and performance data. If you look back, and I'm not going to go back to that, but the curve file, when you look at that, it will give you some peak data, but it's not going to give you enough data to be able to make a recommendation to an engineer to resize a system. So we bring in both that cost data and fine-grained performance data, so you can make decisions that hopefully stick, make recommendations and decisions that stick to say, hey, we need to resize or right-size this system. Right? The other thing that's we do is we really jumpstart your organization. Our solution allows you to extend and integrate your own data sources. We're probably going to have another webinar that talks more about how you would do that. Today, I'm going to show you a little bit more about what we have available in it, and we're constantly building out, but I'm going to tell you more about what we have in the solution as opposed to necessarily showing you that extensibility, but it is there. And if you're familiar with Power BI, data warehouses, you're very familiar with how easy that is to do, to create your own visualizations, link together numerous data stores to be able to come up with these custom cuts at the data and sharing that for your own internal. So what we're going to do here in a moment, I'm going to shift gears here and give you a quick product demo and walk you through the Envisor Analytics. And if I could just get confirmation from somebody on my team that you are seeing the demo environment.
Yep, it looks great, Keith.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so this is our main dashboard when you log into our product. This is Power BI. If you're not familiar with Power BI, this is a Power BI interface. This is the web version of Power BI, by the way. And there is a desktop as well, desktop version. But this is Power BI. We try to give a number of out-of-box reports. Again, you can customize these to how you want, and add to them. But we try to give a number of out-of-box reports to help you very quickly understand the overall health of your cloud and that spend. And we also provide that performance side of things, right? So I have the ability to go in here and look at a couple of key things. So my overall spend for the time frame, I'm looking at 30 days. So in this case, I've got about 29K I spend a little past 30 days. I can start looking at things such as idle spend, which is always, you don't want to waste that money, but you may not have a choice in some cases, right? So, and then I've got managing about $8,000 per month in reservation spend on this stuff. Those reservations are saving me in this 1.25K, so about $1,200 are being saved by my reservation. So, and then I've also got about $3,000 in spot spend. So all of these things come together, right? If you start looking at how do I manage and save money, all these things kind of come together. Combination of, your saving strategies come down to If you can use spot, spot's the cheapest thing. If you can't use spot, the next cheapest thing is turning something off. And if it's something that can't be turned off, then reservations or some sort of savings plan adoption is the way to really go. There's certain things, though, as you talk about and you look at, I have a reservation potential chart over here, which is really showing me, and I'm not going to go into the details of reservations completely here, but this is showing you that there's a certain commit level that you can make in reservations where it becomes favorable in your case. In this case, it's right around this low peak here, which would be kind of, a lot of people might refer to this as a water line. And if I go too far above that, my savings I start to waste that reservation, so to speak. I start to have a reservation that's not being used. If I go too far below that, my coverage is not as high as it could potentially be, right? So I have this water line, and in this case, we're doing pretty well from my perspective. Just looking at this at a glance, is that I've covered up to about my water line. I probably could go up a little bit higher and still have a good savings plan, but this looks healthy to me at a quick at a glance type of scenario. I have the ability to drill into the different machines within this environment. So if you guys use tagging, which I'm sure those of you that have said you have a team in place, I'm sure you have all your machines tagged. We do basically use that to help with hierarchies and being able to translate the data into a way that makes sense to your organization. And you can drill through into the resource detail to understand what's going on with this. So I just kind of picked this at random, right? So I've got an Amazon EC2 instance. This is not a spot instance. It would have been flagged, and it's showing me what I'm spending on this, my daily spend on this relatively small machine, $40 per day. It does add up, as you probably can see very quickly. I do look at, as I mentioned, we have the CPU utilization data. This is going to be an average over the time. I could drill into, try to change my time frame and look at more just a single day, but these are average over time. But I look at, I'm probably maybe a little oversized on this. If I look at this, my CPU is at, my max CPU is averaging out at just over 50%. So, if I were to do trend line, in my average CPU utilization is quite a bit lower than that. I also do, as I mentioned, we do provide cost and performance metrics, right? So a lot of what we're trying to do is help somebody drill into this data. They can look at the details and say, you know what, I need to further look at this machine. All my parameters are underutilized, for the most part. Maybe there's an opportunity for me to right size this machine. And so we're trying to provide, because a lot of times we'll see or we'll hear people say, you know what, I saw the max CPU on this machine, looking at a 1 hour data versus our 5 hour data, or 5 minute data. Our max CPU for this machine may have been 25%, and then they drill in and then they go back to the engineer and say, hey, let's right size this machine. And the engineer very quickly comes back and says, you know what, well, we're maxed out on network on that machine, or we're maxed out on memory. So we're trying to provide enough detail here for a FinOps, a cloud optimization or FinOps professional to make a recommendation and have an intelligent conversation with their engineering counterpart, as opposed to just say, hey, we think that's too big. So these are very powerful metrics to try to figure that out. Okay, I'm going to go back and kind of into some additional views that we have in the data. So from a spend perspective, we're all about trying to help you basically Paretoize your costs and understand where do I want to drill into and try to understand what's going on. So if I look at this top, this is my, one of my top spends here, is this very first resource. I'm looking at this. I've got some peak time on this. Yeah, so this looks pretty well balanced from my perspective. I got some idle time. I've got a lot of green, so it's active and it's being used. I start looking at potentially this guy right here. I'm like half and half, right? So I'm roughly half green, half idle. So that's something I probably want to check into. I start getting down into some of these guys, and very quickly I can see both potential opportunity from a savings perspective, as well as, do I want to spend time on something that has this much, roughly 80% is active and very small percent idle. So we're trying to help you very quickly identify opportunities for improvement, and also identify just if is my environment healthy. We do have a projected spend here, which is kind of interesting as you look at it. We're starting to help folks understand what that spend is going to be like, and predicting that out. So we do, it's not as detailed as a true forecasting situation is, but it will give you some directionality as far as where you're going to see your spend here over the next month or so, right? Okay. And then resource utilization. This is getting more detailed into the ability to drill into and understand the health of your system. And again, the different scenarios here. A lot of this ties back into potentially, if you looked at that initial water line or that potential savings scenario, a lot of this will map fairly closely to that, because reality is, I'm showing that potential savings from a reservation perspective in dollars. Reservations, for those of you familiar, are in hours, right? So you're looking at CPU hours basically it is. And so that first level's metric is very high level. You want to start drilling into more details to understand things such as the utilization here and being able to get into that. And I'm going to shift gears here a little bit into rate optimization. This is if you consider this kind of a preview, it's a product we're getting close to release, is the views in the rate optimization. This is telling me my overall health of my reservations, just a quick status, I should say, of the reservations, and I can drill into this reservations. We will have savings plans here in the very near future, will be available from that perspective. And when we talk about reservations, one of the things I didn't point out, we use reservations fairly generically. So in this data set, I have both Amazon and Microsoft Azure. We will be adding Google in the near future, but so we are multi-cloud. You can filter on all of them, right? So you can drill in and look at combined, or you can look at just one provider if you want to. So okay, so I'm going to drill into the reservations and the spend here, right? So kind of the two main metrics when you're looking at reservations are really the utilization and the coverage rates. And without context potentially of that initial graph that we saw, the waterline graph, this may look a little wonky, but in this case we're above 70%. I think industry best practice, it's probably higher than 80%, but we do have a pretty variable demand in this demo data. So being above 70% is not necessarily a bad thing. And if you do a trend line, we're probably above 80% on that, from a trend line perspective. So you're going to have some fluctuation in that data. The coverage, we're potentially light compared to some companies when you look at this at being, maybe 25% coverage depending on the variability. But we do have a highly variable demand pattern for this environment. And that's where you've got a balance between spot and reservations, and try to make sure you're using the correct types of correct data, or correct metrics. It's not just one single metric that goes into making these decisions. And we're trying to bring together, the old balanced scorecard scenario. I can go into the reservation detail for specific reservation and see more details as far as that. And you really, again, work towards understanding the health of that environment. So we do point out, the utilization, break-even days, that's a pretty key metric when you're deciding on a reservation. Was the break-even time frame, and just a quick way to understand, does this make sense? Reservation savings, break-even really tends to play out more when you're doing a prepay scenario, and does it make sense for you to do the overall reservation savings? Again, this is the single reservation that we're looking at. We have the ROI metrics here, as well as actual savings and projected savings. And if your utilization of a reservation isn't high, you're going to have low actual savings, as you're seeing in this scenario, which is partly because that variability in demand. So okay, I'm actually going to shift gears now and head back to the presentation and close out, and we're going to open up for Q&A here in after about 2 or 3 slides. Apologize, that took a moment. So I just want to kind of close on that, right? So one of the things that we do from a Senturus perspective is our heritage is in in developing BI solutions. Whether it's a data lake, data warehouse, pulling in data from multiple systems of record, that's our heritage. So we do have our product. We just showed you the Envisor Cloud Analytics, which is available out of the box, which will give you a data warehouse you can augment. If you need help with that, guess what? We can do that too. So we can augment beyond that and also incorporate additional data. So if you're in a scenario, if you're back to that previous slide where you don't have the resources to do this, but you anticipate that you do want to have the flexibility, you could leverage our product to start adding value on day one. We do spin up our system in less than 24 hours and have access to a data warehouse for cloud cost optimization. Try that on your own. It just, kind of unprecedented to have that. So you'll have that data warehouse available in 24 hours. We can augment that. You can augment that over time as it makes sense as well. So with that said, I'm going to jump ahead 2 more slides. We do have, we are offering a free assessment with your own data. So if you guys have interest in understanding or learning more about our product, this involvement from you is about 15 minutes to basically connect our system to your data. There's no download or anything. It's just purely a quick connection to your environment. We'll start bringing the data into our system, and within 24 hours, we can set up time with you and review your cloud KPIs. So be happy to do that for you. So just, I think we have contact information on the slide. If you're interested in that, we'd be happy to do that. Again, that would be with your own data. Be able to very quickly identify if you're not, for those of you that are not using reservations today, we can quickly help you understand what your reservation potential is and potential savings would be. If you are using reservations, we can help you see the power, the flexibility of using a data warehouse if you're not using one today, but you be able to see the power of using a data warehouse instead of using a rigid, inflexible tool. So, okay. So again, just kind of reiterating that previous slide, right? So if you do need help beyond what we offer, Senturus is a long heritage of doing that. So we can help pull that data from multiple systems, help you with your report construction, as well as integrating other data sources. So with that said, I'm actually going to turn this back over to Steve, and we're going to close out and open up for questions.
All right, thanks, Keith. And as Keith said, we're going to do a couple more slides here and then go to Q&A. So anybody who has questions, you can go ahead and type those into the questions panel while I'm talking here. Just a little bit of quick overview on Senturus. We do have a ton of additional resources available to you on our website. So by all means, go over there and take a look at our Knowledge Center. We've been committed to sharing our BI expertise for over 2 decades now. So go to senturus.com/resources for lots of valuable information. We also have another upcoming webinar on November 17th, KPIs from disparate data sources in minutes. We'll actually be having a Senturus alum guesting that day. Mike Weinhauer will be hosting that webinar along with me. So we hope to see you there on November 17th. And just a quick background on Senturus. We've been in the BI business for over 20 years. We do concentrate on BI modernizations and migrations across the entire stack and across multiple clouds. We provide a full spectrum of services, including Power BI, Cognos, Tableau, Python, and Azure, in addition to proprietary solutions. So we're happy to help you out with anything you may need on the business analytics side. And we do really shine in hybrid BI environments, which of course are very common today. We've been in business for over 20 years. Oh, Keith zoomed by that. I'll just say we've been in business for a long time. We've got lots of experience is the point. We know many of you already. We've been in business over 20 years, over 1,300 clients, and over 3,000 projects. So a long, strong history of success here. We are hiring, so if you're interested in joining the Senturus team, we're currently looking for a FinOps consultant, as well as a Microsoft BI, Power BI consultant. So if you think you might fit the bill for that, you can send us your resume at jobs@senturus.com. You can also find the job descriptions on our website.
Yeah, and I will say I did selfishly jump to this
Keith?
page because of the FinOps consultant we actually have a couple openings in the FinOps area. So would love if you guys have any interest in FinOps in helping the Envisor team in our practice, we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Keith. And with that, we're going to go ahead and open it up for Q&A. Also, just for anybody who may not have seen it already, you'll see Scott Felton just posted a note to the chat window. If you are interested in learning more about FinOps, data solutions, or anything related to Senturus, you can grab some time on Scott's calendar, and there is a link there in the chat window. And we do have one question here, Keith, from Alex. Asking whether we use AWS CUD and or Azure cost management data as the data we ingest, or do we use other data APIs? And I think Bob Looney, our VP of software, is out there. I think, Bob, you might be most suited to answering this, but I don't mean to put you on the spot. And or Keith, you may know the answer.
Sorry, a little double mute going on there. Yeah, no, we definitely use API-driven data access. You can actually kind of get at some of those things both ways, but we use a blend of operational and financial data coming into the system so that we can show both the spend and the utilization. And just to tack on to the second part of that, can we also ingest logs into the BI reports? It'd be outside of our data warehouse, but absolutely Power BI, that's one of the reasons we've gone to this sort of solution, is so that you can bring in all sorts of these other data metrics and blend with your other organizational data, things from website hits to your financials to your number of engineers on staff to get some more meaningful metrics to both forecast with as well as report on.
Thanks, Bob. One other thing, and this isn't really a question, but more of just a comment on my part about one of the things that I find really useful in the Cloud Analytics interface is this opportunity for identifying right-sizing options for servers. So one thing for anybody who's spent a lot of time in AWS Cost Explorer or Azure Cost Management, you probably know there are tools in there to help you kind of identify options for reservations and savings plans and that kind of thing. But what the providers don't really do is tell you, hey, maybe you just need a smaller server rather than reserving something for a long period of time. So personally, I think that's a great benefit here, just because there are often cases where you have a server that is way underutilized, and maybe the answer is to size that down to be a smaller server rather than committing to running it for a certain amount of time under a reservation to get a discount. So I find that really useful. And also, I pity anybody who has ever had to look at the line item detail on an Azure or AWS invoice. I personally don't use Google Cloud, so I don't know how Google does it, but I know what a nightmare it is to try to make sense out of those invoices and to try to translate that into meaningful metrics, for your organization to figure out, the best path forward. So being able to ingest and normalize the data directly from the clouds rather than trying to make sense out of invoices and or just making sense out of the different formats that things are presented in, depending on whether you're using the AWS tool for evaluating costs versus the Azure tool versus other clouds. So just having all of that normalized from all of the clouds is really, really beneficial. And with that, do we have any other last questions here before we wrap up? Looks like I don't see any. Oh, here we go. We've got a question from Peter. We replaced old school temporary storage with data lake. Dirty data sticking around forever. Is it balanced by benefits of flexibility to scale up and down? So Peter, I'm not sure that I understand your question. Is it about scaling up and down cloud database sizes or performance? I don't know if you can answer in the chat window there. I mean, maybe a better way to pose the question, and so Keith, Bob, I'm not sure who to address this to.
Let's give him a moment to respond to you. And there's one other question here that's that I'll take very quickly here. It's what other data do you see organizations blending with cloud spend to create useful metrics? And so one of the most common things that we see and are asked about is being able to bring in basically sales data and engineering hours, and being able to then translate that back into on the effectively a cost to serve on both sides, right? So being able to come back and say the marginal cost to serve a client is X, the cost of the engineering team is also another thing, right? Especially in large organizations that have multiple engineering teams, and being able to benchmark across the various organizations. And depending on your company's philosophy, I mean, we have, if Google talks about cloud optimization and wants it to be, this blameless concept, other companies want to very publicly display who's the best of the best. And so however you want to shape that, the tool gives you the flexibility, but those are kind of the most common things that we see people trying to bring into the system. Okay, so we have a rephrased question here that
Keith, yeah. So Peter is saying we have a lot more duties with data now than before data lakes, and is that compensated by the benefits of scaling cloud resources? And to be honest, I don't know how data costs, scaling of data costs works. I personally don't deal directly with that. I don't know if Bob or Keith, you have any insight into that.
Maybe we can take that one offline and follow up directly. We're also at the top of the hour here, so it's maybe we take that one offline, would be my suggestion.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes sense. So Peter, we can reach out to you separately to address that question. And with that, Keith, why don't you go ahead and advance to the final slide. Just a quick thank you to everybody for attending today's webinar. We do appreciate all of you being here. We're happy to talk to you by any means that you might wish to reach out to us. You can contact us through our website. You can contact us by phone. You can also contact us by email. And as I said, there's a link there in the chat window where you can set up a meeting with Scott Felton if you'd like to discuss Envisor Cloud Analytics or really anything related to your business analytics environments. So thank you again, everybody, for attending. Oh, and Keith.
I was going to say, for those of you that want to avoid the sending an email to Senturus to stay out of our database, feel free to reach out to Scott or myself via LinkedIn messaging. We're happy to take a conversation there as well.
Great point, Keith. So thank you. So yes, by all means, if you prefer to reach out by LinkedIn, you can find Keith and Scott, and they will be happy to talk to you. So thank you, everybody, for attending today's webinar. We do hope to see you on a future Senturus webinar, and have a great day, everyone. Bye now.
Thanks again.